Today is episode 61 with Dr. B.
Welcome to the Living Beyond ADHD podcast. If you're looking for a fresh perspective and actionable steps on hot topics from focus to follow-through to self-management and more, you are in the right place. Welcome your host, innovative educator, coach, and psychotherapist, Dr. B.
Hey there, ADDers. You know, foresight is the secret ingredient to success. Because without foresight, you cannot prepare for the future. There is no future. With our fast-paced lives, it's becoming harder and harder to establish foresight because our world is changing faster than ever before. Are you someone who had no idea or has no idea of what sort of world you should prepare for? And if that's you, have you given up or decided that you can't know or do anything about your future? That you're just going to have to deal with the cards that get dealt to you over time, and that's just how it is. That's you being reactive rather than responsive to the circumstances of your life. Foresight gives us power to shape our futures, no matter what's going on in the world around us. If you've developed your foresight, you can think ahead and you can be prepared to take advantage of all of the new opportunities that are going to present themselves. And if you've developed foresight, you might also be able to avert many of the negative experiences that could hurt you or someone else. This is my idea of striving to be living ready. Having foresight and living ready applies to both your personal and your professional lives. And having well-developed emotional control, which is another executive function skill, and stimulus filters, those things that block out all the extra stuff that you don't want coming in to your mind. It's important to regulate your emotions and control the amount of the incoming stimulus so you stay out of overwhelm and you don't get flooded with too much information, which makes it impossible to really function effectively. It's very difficult to make good decisions when you don't know what to consider as part of your decision-making process because you're trying to process everything that's in your mind, everything that's coming into your mind, and it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for anyone. You also need to know what things mean in order to apply foresight skills in life. What does it mean when you're experiencing certain symptoms, physically or emotionally, or in your workplace, or in your marriage? When should you go into action? And when should you wait a little bit and watch the unfolding of the symptoms to give you enough information to make a well-thought-out decision and then take action? Lack of foresight impacts students, workers, business owners, couples, and individuals. Studies are neglected when there's no connection that's seen between education and a successful future, which is not to say that education is the only way to a successful future, but without seeing that connection, if education is part of your successful future, then you're just not going to study. Commitments or promises are neglected when no connection is seen between a rocky relationship and keeping one's word. When you have good foresight skills, you can recognize the importance of studying and select courses that will most likely help you to meet your goals. If your foresight is weak, you may have difficulty saving money for emergencies or retirement or even a down payment on a home or a boat. Let's give this some further thought. If you don't have foresight, then why in the world would you make a plan or schedule or sequence of events? Because there's nothing tangible in the future for you to consider if you're missing this critical executive function skill. Why would you do it? Many adults I've worked with over the years have said, I can't plan or schedule or sequence tasks very well at all. And that might be true. However, is the reason it's true because of weak foresight skills? It makes sense to me to review orientation in time for a moment, since through time and in time is relevant to foresight. I've talked about this before in other episodes, but it's been a while, so here we go. In time is when you're in the zone. Perhaps time even disappears, and there's nothing more than now, this moment. Think of a timeline that runs front to back through your body. The future is out there somewhere, and the past, it's behind you. So all that exists is now. You can't gauge how far in front of you the future is, and you can't benefit from the past because it's behind you and it's out of sight. With through time, you can gain perspective and you can look to the future, to the past, to the present moment. You can consider what you want to have happen and what you need to do to achieve the outcome you want. Think of a timeline that runs from side to side through you. You can also consider consequences when you're oriented through time. So to have the skill of foresight, you need the flexibility of shifting, which is another executive function skill, and be able to go back and forth between in time and through time. You also need the ability to imagine, to think about something that hasn't happened yet. Many of us are really very good at imagining the worst, even though it hasn't happened yet, and it may not. However, many have difficulty imagining the best, even though that hasn't happened yet, and may very well be the outcome, a positive one. So now it's not just the mechanics of foresight and forward thinking, it's navigating your emotional control, which is another executive function skill, to allow yourself to be okay with a great outcome. In fact, to allow yourself to be unattached to the outcome at all. And the more that you're attached to things going a certain way, the harder and harder it is to get there because you have so many less options to navigate with. And even though most of the executive function assessments typically look at the behavioral stuff, your emotions and thoughts also factor in to how you're doing with your executive function skills in general and foresight specifically. To me, as well as my Adventures in Achievement students, foresight is essential and worth developing, as many already have. So, if you relate to anything at all that I've mentioned so far, then this episode is for you. Going deeper, I see the importance of addressing this skill because planning and scheduling is a huge part of adult life. Making transitions and shifting between things is also a huge part of adult life. And without foresight, planning, scheduling, making transitions and shifting just don't have much reason to be happening at all. So where are you going to be able to go to develop your foresight and everything that's connected to it? If you have someone that you can do that work with, that's great. And if you don't, I hope that you'll consider allowing me to be that person for you. I'm hosting a free live webinar Sunday, April 7th, 2019, and I would love to have you join me. The topic is moving from stuck to unstoppable. Discover 9 powerful skills that will change your life. You can learn more and you can register at drbarbaracohen.com. If you feel like your life is passing and you aren't achieving all that you want, then responding quickly is important. How much time do any of us have? Not all that much. Time doesn't stand still for any of us, whether we are ready to move forward or not. I learned long ago that I wanted to live ready for the unfolding of my life. I didn't want to have to pass on any more opportunities because I wasn't ready and I couldn't say yes when I wanted to. If my podcast show is the first time you've been hearing about executive function skills and strategies, you're not alone. If you're an adult who received a diagnosis of adult ADHD, executive function skills should also have been assessed and discussed with you, in my humble opinion. The odds of having executive function deficits along with ADHD are very high. In fact, almost a given that you will. And what is one critically important way that you would have learned some of these skills and strategies as a kid? It might surprise you, but it's play. Not organized play, but the type of exploratory play that Dr. Stuart Brown, MD, talks about in his book, Play. How it shapes the brain, opens the imagination, and invigorates the soul. When's the last time that you had a play date by yourself or with a friend? Play is critically important to adult development, just as it is for kids. I used to put on puppet shows from my bedroom window when I was a kid. It gave me the opportunity to make up people and stories and how things would unfold for each of them. As I grew older, I realized that this type of play gave me the freedom to explore, take risks, experiment, and be creative, all in a judgment-free zone. I know I learned a lot of things unconsciously because I felt I was stretching myself beyond what I normally did. The point is to make time for real play, and then just play. And don't worry if you're doing it right or what you're learning. Just play. Here's an important takeaway. Focus on the process of play rather than the outcome of playing. Today's episode is about the executive function skill of foresight and the strategies I see as relevant for you as an adult living with ADHD or executive function deficits, as well as offering you hope, real hope. How much time do we have? Not much. So let's get to it. Today's 3 key points and stories are: what is personal foresight and how can you start to develop it? What is relationship foresight and how can you start to develop that? And what is business foresight and how can you start to develop it?
This podcast is sponsored by Pure Potential with Dr. B. You can head over to drbarbaracohen.com and find the podcast transcript. Great free content, plus information on programs and services, including the groundbreaking Adventures in Achievement online coaching program and one-to-one services with Dr. B. That's drbarbaracohen.com.
Now back to being an adult with ADHD or executive function challenges in today's world. There may be many reasons why you haven't heard about executive function skills and strategies until listening to my podcast show, and you can't change that fact. You can't. However, now that you know about them, you can get moving on what you're going to do about your weak areas, as well as to make the most of your strengths. I have stories to share with you, including action steps, and of course, a favorite quote of mine. But first, I want to talk about celebrating your wins, big and small, since wins are such an important part of my philosophy. Remember, what we pay attention to grows, so paying attention to what's right instead of what's wrong helps to generate more of what's right. Seems simple enough. And when you acknowledge and celebrate your wins with a full heart of appreciation and authenticity, you are giving yourself a priceless gift. That is, unless you find it painful to acknowledge and celebrate your wins. And if that's the case, I highly recommend that you address whatever it is that makes it necessary for you to block yourself so you can be free to appreciate all the wonders that are you. No one else may be celebrating your wins, and that's okay for now, because living in awe of yourself and what you learn and what you love about you is critically important to your well-being. And please, don't shortchange yourself by thinking it's pointless or it's stupid to reward yourself for all the little things that you're supposed to do. That couldn't be further from the truth. And are you really going to make yourself wait until something huge happens to celebrate? And does something huge happen every day? Probably not. It doesn't for me. But the kind of wins I talk about can and often do, which is really exciting. And for what I see, celebrating wins is absolutely a necessity to getting out of the emotional ditch of whatever ails you and into a better attitude and a better way of living. So what's it going to be for you today? What are you going to celebrate, truly celebrate? Maybe you got rid of lots of papers through a shredder. That's certainly a win. Perhaps you've been working on stepping into a new definition of yourself. That's a wonderful win. Maybe someone offered to help you for no apparent reason other than they wanted to spend some time together. That's a win. You get the point. Celebrate all of them, big and small, and none of this half-hearted celebrating. You've got to mean it. You've got to exaggerate your emotions. Yes, wow, awesome. You want your acknowledgement and celebration to register in your neurology with the power to move you and shift your state. Many of us need a higher level of stimulation or intensity for things to register, and some of us don't. So if this is you, give it to yourself and exaggerate your celebration so you can actually feel it and it can do something for you. And listen, you're not broken, you're not defective, and you're not less than. You're you. You are a precious human being whose value is a given. Because I'm not talking about you as the human doing that most of society views you as. And you may be missing some skills that have been making your life very difficult up to now, and yet skills can be learned. Please know that I'm not making light of your struggles or your unhappiness. Not at all. I wouldn't do that. It's disrespectful. I want you to know that there are truly answers to your struggles if you're willing to be a student of your own life and develop a deeper understanding of yourself and how you're put together, and offer yourself a lot of compassion and patience, plus the time, effort, and energy that it's going to take to make the necessary changes. Then these things can and will happen for you. I know this is true because I wasn't born with these skills fully developed, and neither were any of my students, and neither were you. These are learned. So please don't let yourself be one of the 80% of people who don't ever make it to the more permanent change, or even the 80% who want to change, but never actually end up making the changes they want for many different reasons. There's training and support available to you to ensure, to the best of my ability, that you don't become one of the 80% who don't make it. Rather, you're one of the 20% who do. I recommend that you go to my website, drbarbaracohen.com. You get yourself registered for the upcoming free webinar so you can start making changes right away. So let's transition to some stories and action steps now. Our first story is about Manny and what personal foresight is. And of course, some action steps about how you can start to develop it. Manny was in his early 50s and recently diagnosed with adult ADHD. He'd been fighting the chaos of his life forever, and things just seemed to happen to him rather than having anything to do with him. His friends often heard him say that he hadn't planned for things to turn out the way that they did, and yet they turned out poorly because there was no actual plan. It was as if his life had a plan of its own, and that Manny had nothing to say about how his life was unfolding. He was watching a favorite TV show, and the word foresight was mentioned in a story. They said that if the character had any foresight at all, he would have seen these things coming long before they hit. This was the first time Manny heard the word foresight. He was feeling desperate and did some research on the topic of foresight. He learned that awareness is the first step to everything else that we do. He understood that he was going to have to wake up and to stop living his life on autopilot. He was going to need to stop saying, "I don't know," when people asked him questions. He was going to need to think and consider. He was going to need to become fully present, to use what information he had access to, and to develop his foresight. Manny got very sad when he realized that His most important gift was time, and that so much of that gift had slipped away with the passing years. Some background facts about personal insight. There is the conscious and the non-conscious part of the mind. The statistics that I learned in school indicate that 90% of our mind is non-conscious, and it's filled with habits and entrenched patterns that are acted out on autopilot. Doesn't involve thinking. The remaining 10% of our mind is conscious, and this is where logic, reason, willpower, and thinking take place. In this 9-to-1 ratio, unconscious mind is more powerful than conscious mind. And information that makes its way into our mind passes through many filters that delete, distort, and generalize information on their way to being stored. This means that you delete information that doesn't fit with your habituated thoughts. You distort or you twist information to make it fit with your worldview. And you process information in an all-or-nothing black and white fashion. Information also passes through the filters of your attitudes, your values, your beliefs, your memories, and more. You are not having a direct experience in the moment. Rather, you're having a filtered moment. If you relate to Manny's story, your action steps are focus on becoming more awake or aware in the moment, rather than letting your mind take you wherever it wants to go. Be the driver of your attention, not the passenger. Follow through and practice training yourself to notice the fine details of any given situation. And I know you're going to want to skip over this because so many do, because it takes time and it slows you down, and it's worth it. Opportunities for training are notice how people are walking, how their weight is distributed on their feet as they move. What can you predict about the possible pain that they feel? Notice your posture when you sit in a chair. Are you sitting upright and well supported? If yes, it's great. If not, then what might you predict about how your body will develop over time? Challenge yourself to wake up and see yourself as who and how you really are, not who and how your unconscious mind says that you are. Release the fantasy vision and embrace the reality, because that's what you have to work with, and that is where you would start. Self-management will be based on what you're training yourself to become aware of and how you're feeling about your emerging awareness. Let's transition now to our second story about Fran and what relationship foresight is and some action steps about how you can begin to develop it. Fran was in her mid-40s. She wasn't diagnosed until her late 30s, and she married in her early 40s. She had no idea when she married what the absence of relationship foresight would mean to the success of her marriage and her own personal happiness. Not only was Fran not a forward thinker, she had challenges with following a train of thought in her mind and even mapping them out on a piece of paper. Having children was really important to Fran and her husband, and since they married later in life, they didn't spend a lot of time looking ahead to see what that really meant for their relationship at this phase of life. Fran got pregnant shortly after they married and gave birth to twins. She was overwhelmed and frustrated that life as she knew it was over for some time to come. Not only did her lack of relationship foresight fail her during her pregnancy, it also failed her as a mother when she couldn't anticipate outcomes with the twins. Others could see the warning signs long before problems erupted, yet Fran saw nothing. She also didn't see some of the warning signs of what was happening as her marriage was eroding. So here's some background facts about relationship foresight. When people come together in a relationship, there are many assumptions that we make. The biggest one is that all the adult skills that are needed to be responsible and make good decisions are fully developed, which is not the case many times. A significant executive function skill related to foresight is self-control. Poor impulse control doesn't allow you the time that you need to consider all the facts in order to effectively or efficiently decide on choices, consequences, and outcomes. In order to course correct in a relationship, you have to know where it is that you want to go, both of you. And it's equally important to have the executive function skill of task monitoring strong so that you can know when you're getting off course and what to do to course correct and to reach your goal as a couple or people in a relationship. If you relate to Fran's story, your action steps are: focus on determining which of the executive function skills beyond foresight would most benefit you and those closest to you. Follow through on building and mastering those specific skills and supporting strategies. Self-management of how you're feeling might have anchored associations of anger, frustration, and overwhelm that are easily triggered. Consider how you will best remove those triggers and free yourself from autopilot. So let's transition to our third story about Lenny and what business foresight is, and action steps about how you can begin to develop it. Lenny was in his mid-30s and had started a business a year ago after deciding that he was ready to be on his own instead of working for others. He felt he had a vision of what he wanted his business to be and do and how he would get there, but he didn't actually have a plan for achieving his vision, just a felt sense of what needed to happen, vague at best. And his motivation for starting his business was more about getting away from working for others rather than about being a business owner and all that that entails. He had no forward thinking or foresight about what he would need to do to grow his business into what he envisioned. He didn't know the steps or even the trajectory of growth, just that he was tired of working for others and he wanted his own business. His friends started asking him questions about his business, his growth plans, and how everything was coming together. Lenny was embarrassed by those questions, and he usually dodged them as best as he could. He would just say that everything was fine and move on. A year later, everything wasn't fine, nowhere near fine. He was deeply in debt, working long hours, exhausted all the time, and confused about his results. While he was driving to a business meeting, he happened to listen to a business podcast episode on foresight and its importance in building and running a successful business. He was so overwhelmed with feelings that he had to pull his car over and just sit for half an hour. He was asking himself, how could he be so naive to just go into business without being able to see ahead into the future of his business, to see what it would need and what it would take for the business to become what Lenny envisioned. He then remembered a phrase from another podcast show that warned about paying attention to who you're becoming on the way to where it is that you're going. Clearly, Lenny did not like who he had become on the way to his business success. In fact, most of his friends didn't like who he'd become either. Some background facts about business foresight. In business, you need to prioritize and sequence for growth. With foresight, you must be able to learn to identify the relevant past and present, to anticipate or forecast or predict the relevant probable future, to innovate or imagine or experiment or play with possible future outcomes, and to strategize or analyze and plan for the preferred or desired outcomes. And your emotions are tied to your thinking. So as you build your foresight muscles, you want your thoughts to be focused on the future and possibilities and options for you so that you can more effectively regulate your emotions. If you relate to Lenny's story, your action steps are: focus on coming up with a list of different futures, perhaps as many as 50. Follow through on mapping out what each of these futures will look like and what you like or dislike about each of them. Self-management about how you feel about taking time that's necessary to build this foresight muscle, because it takes time, effort, and energy and requires that you slow down because you need to be able to focus on the facts rather than mindlessly processing them. Remember that no matter which stories you identify with, you need to cultivate a practicing mindset and come to look forward to practicing something every day that's moving you forward towards your destination. And since we're talking about foresight here today, give yourself the gift of time to develop this skill. Yes, it's going to take some work on your part, but the work doesn't have to be hard and it doesn't have to be boring. It can be fun and it can be playful. In fact, play is the way to go when it comes to learning new skills and new strategies, and it isn't just for kids. It's not enough to know the steps that you need to take in a process. You can get that from a book or other informational product. You need the support and understanding and sense of community to help carry the load that we all sometimes feel. You might even need someone to walk beside you step by step to help guide your actions and follow through so you stay the course and you don't quit and you achieve your outcome. And again, if you don't have a place to go for support and knowledge about how to transform your life into what you've always wanted, I recommend that you register for the upcoming free webinar that I'm hosting by putting your information in the form on either my drbarbracohen.com or adventuresinachievement.com website so that you can get started with your new training. Learning skills and strategies may sound like a lot of work, and maybe it is, but it doesn't have to be unpleasant work. In fact, it can be fun and playful if you approach it that way and you're giving it those types of meanings. I've been playing with these skills and strategies for years now because I had to learn them just like you do. I knew that I would be more inclined to stick with learning them and actually learn them and master them if I could make this a fun experience for myself, which is exactly what I did. And I've continued to be a student of my own life, as I hope you will be of yours, and stick with it until you achieve mastery and the happier and more productive life that you want. If you want to be part of an online community of listeners to my show, be sure to reach out and friend me on Facebook so I can invite you into the Living Beyond ADHD community. We're going to be getting more active and engaged there, and I look forward to getting to know you and helping you in whatever ways that I can. And if you want more than just the Facebook group, get yourself registered for the free webinar. Don't miss out on this great opportunity to get your needs met, because I'm interested in meeting them. A favorite quote of mine. William A. Foster said, "Quality is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives." So my question that I have for you at this point in our journey together is, are you ready to make the necessary time to cultivate your foresight so that you can make wise choices from so many alternatives? I hope so, because this is your life that we're talking about. That's about it for today's episode on foresight and a little about how you can start to develop this skill in various areas of your life. Thanks for letting me know how much my show helps you and means to you. It means a lot for me to know that your life is getting a little bit better every time we get together. Listening to every podcast episode is a small action step and something you can do to help yourself to move forward one episode at a time. If you take action on the steps that I include for you. If you just listen and hear the value and think these things are a good idea, but you don't take action, you won't gain the value that's there for you. Remember, for things to change for the better for you, you have to change, which means that you need to do your very best every day to do something that'll lead you in the direction of your destination. And if you'd like to do something more and you like what I'm doing here on the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Google Play or YouTube or wherever you're listening from. And share this show with your friends and family. Ratings and reviews are extremely helpful and greatly appreciated. The greater the number of reviews and the higher the ranking, the easier it's going to be for other people to find this show, people who also need this information. Plus, I'd love to know more about what you think of the show and the information that I share with you. Thanks in advance for that gift. It helps me in my mission to make sure that all adults with focus, follow-through, self-management, or executive function challenges have the information and skills to help them live a happier, more productive, and wildly successful life. That is the driving force behind this show and the expanded content in the Adventures in Achievement program. So feel free to rate the show, even if you don't choose to write a review. I'm grateful for whatever it is that you're willing to do that helps me bring benefit to the greater number of people. Thank you in advance for your kindness and your participation. I've always felt that the world might be a much better place if we viewed each other as community or extended family and saw the needs of each other and reached out because we can. So long as it isn't done at the expense of your relationship with yourself and meeting your own needs. We're not alone in this life of ours, none of us. We are all interconnected in such a unique and mysterious way, and we can see that even more so by developing our executive function skills and strategies. It's amazing. I know my episode production schedule is still erratic for reasons that aren't worth going into at this point. So if you don't want to have to remember to look for new episodes, just subscribe and the newest episode will be in your feed as soon as it's released. Thanks for listening. Until the next time, bye for now.
Thanks for your undivided attention. If you're eager to make positive changes in your life, head over to drbarbaracohen.com to see how Dr. B can help you today. Whether you love making changes with community support in a group environment or prefer one-to-one coaching or psychotherapy, you'll find all the information you need to get started at drbarbaracohen.com.